Sarah, Boon, Dr. Fuller, good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Really been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time now. So very excited to finally get to sit down with you guys.
Us too.
Good. Well, looks got folks jumping on already. Our good friend, Mr. Will Parker, he has coin number 800 of the beautiful state of Montana. If you're wondering what this coin number business is all about, check out links in today's show notes to find out if becoming a member of the American Warrior Society is the right decision for you and your family. We got all the information in the training vault to keep you and your family safer. White belt to blue belt, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I believe, Boon, you are a black belt in BJJ, are you not?
Correct, yes, under Benjamin Glossop. Yep.
That's outstanding. I don't know. I think I might be, I'll have to check IBJJF. I might be the grand old blue belt of the IBJJF. I'll have to check.
That's right.
But, yeah, I don't know that I'll ever get my fourth stripe. I don't know if my body can hang for that, but God bless you, brother. That's amazing. But we got white belt to blue belt with Christian Dare from Clinch MMA. He's a John Machado black belt. We've got less lethal rifle, handgun, shotgun, vehicle, everything you need to keep you and your family safer. We got Will Rhodes is on from Missouri. He's coin number 2269. John Shriver, Yukon, Oklahoma. My lovely bride, Miss Lisa, is on. Alan Kelly is on from Occupied Virginia. Shan Hemphill is on. Good morning, sir. He is coin number 40-something. Guys, we got a great show for you. I'm going to go ahead and read their bio, and we'll talk about our guest today is Sarah Adams and Dave Boon Benton. Sarah and Dave work together at the Central Intelligence Agency. Their book, Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, shares their personal cold case investigation into the attacks that occurred between September the 11th and September the 12th, 2012 in Benghazi, Libya. A little bit about Sarah. Sarah was an intelligence analyst and targeter for the CIA. She also served as the senior advisor to the U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on Benghazi. Currently, she leads Department of Defense research and development efforts to answer complex national security challenges. And if that sounds vague, it's supposed to, guys. Dave Boon Benton has over 25 years of experience serving in specialized teams and leadership roles in the military, law enforcement, protective security, and the United States government's intelligence community. He was a member of the CIA's Global Response Staff, GRS, that responded to the September 11, 2012 terrorist attacks on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. His story was told in the book 13 Hours and the movie of the same name. Dr. T.C. Fuller, who is no stranger to this group, is a retired FBI special agent with over 20 years of service. Prior to that, he was an Army infantry officer and EOD officer. Of course, my old pal Rich Brown, retired Marine Corps officer, former police officer, and special teams officer. And if that sounds vague, guys, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having us.
Dr. Fuller, if you would, sir.
Well, I'm really excited that you folks took the time to be on the show today. Thank you very much for coming. I was hoping that perhaps we could start with you sort of setting the stage. How did this land in your laps? How did you get to the point where you eventually wrote the book? I mean, where did this all start for both of you?
Yeah, I mean, what it started with is I joined the Select Committee on Benghazi. And one of the reasons I joined it is I was hoping there'd be some sort of oversight of the actual investigation into the terrorists who attacked us. That wasn't really in their purview, and they didn't do that. And it was during that time I realized no one in the intelligence community was really going after our attackers. And so I talked to Boon about it, and that was 2015. And we decided at that point we would launch our own personal investigation and identify them ourselves. And so we've been doing it now for 9 years.
Wow. And is that about the time you got involved as well, Boon? Is 2015?
Yes, yeah, we started the investigation together. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm interested, when you said that you got on the select committee, how did that happen? How did you manage to pull that off? And which side of the fence did you land on when you were working? I mean, I'm assuming you were hired by a specific committee member.
Yeah, actually 2 congressmen flew down to visit me in Florida. At the time, it was Trey Gowdy and Jason Chaffetz. So Trey Gowdy ran the select committee on Benghazi, and Jason Chaffetz ran the oversight committee. And it was after that meeting that they asked me to join. The interesting part is at the time I was a Democrat, but they hired me on the Republican side for my expertise. So they didn't actually care about what party I belonged to. They just wanted my skill set.
Yeah, that's I can understand that completely, because if you have that skill set and that expertise, that was well, at least in some of the meetings that I attended with that committee, they that was sorely lacking. Because as some may know that are regular viewers of the show, I was on the FBI's Office of Congressional Affairs, so I liaised between the FBI and Capitol Hill. And at one point, I became the FBI's point man for the Benghazi committees. So I was in all kinds of those meetings with Mr. Gowdy and Ms. Chaffetz and what have you. So that's really interesting that, we probably sat in similar meetings, although I think by 2015, I had finally knocked the dust of DC off my boots. So I wasn't there for the meetings that you were there for. So how did that progress once you were hired, once they brought you into the fold, as it were? How did that go from there?
Well, yeah, so I joined in 2015. The committee had only been running 6 months at the time, and then we went another 2 years. So we finished in January 2017. So we obviously laid out, the events that happened before, during, and after the attacks, and then recommendations to fix, obviously, some of the deficiencies in our system. And then I went to the private sector for a bit after I left the committee.
And how about you, Boon? Did you just sort of get folded up in that at the same time she did, or?
No, I had nothing to do with the committee at all.
Wise man.
I was actually actively still working for the agency until 2016. And then after that, I went into the private sector.
So how did the two of you connect? Just you'd known each other from working in the agency?
Yeah, we were teammates, but after the Benghazi investigation, after the committee concluded, that's when we decided to do our investigation.
Yeah, but we actually worked together in Benghazi. I mean, we've been working together since 2009, so it's a small community.
Yeah, no, you got that right. So what did you come up with? I mean, so you get on board in 2015. I mean, what kind of assets were you given, and what did you do with them?
So this is really uncomfortable that there's like an FBI person on the call. But anyway. So,
hey, I agree with you on that one, Sarah. You nailed that.
Yeah, because, obviously there's some issues with the FBI side of our investigation. So what we did is we identified over 150 of the terrorists that were on the ground at the Consulate attacks. So that was on September 11th. That was the attacks planned by the head of Al-Qaeda at the time, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, and he had it masterminded by a terrorist named Muqdal Belmokhtar. Then there was a separate attacks on our CIA annex. Those were masterminded by a terrorist named Wissam bin Hamid. There's 10 members of a mortar team there that struck us. And unfortunately, the FBI's key witness in the person they call the mastermind, 5 of the mortar team members were his family. So yeah, we have a lot of problems with the way the FBI did not go after our attackers and went after the wrong people, as you can imagine.
I was actually motivated when I was threatened to be subpoenaed to testify against Abu Khatala, who was not the mastermind at all. And I told them that, and they kind of pressured me to, hey, we really need you to testify. And I refused because he wasn't the mastermind. And that's what kind of was the catalyst for me to get involved in my own investigation.
It would have been a great opportunity to get in there and say, I'm here to testify, and that's not the guy. That's the guy.
They didn't care to bring in any of the people from the CIA annex who didn't believe he was the guy.
No.
Wow. Well, saves you from having to show up, I suppose.
They're actually retrying him again this summer, which we find very ironic.
But still, the folks that you've identified haven't been corralled up?
Not at all, no.
And does that include, I mean, are they in the United States or are they still overseas?
They're all overseas. Luckily, there is kind of a strong man in Libya. He runs a Libyan National Army named General Haftar, and he's killed, luckily, half of our attackers. The rest of them are at large, and most of them are in the capital of Tripoli. Some are in Turkey, and we do have some in other parts of the country, the world. We have some in the United Kingdom. We have some in Sweden. We have one in Saudi Arabia. So they have proliferated, and we have a couple in Afghanistan, as you can imagine, with everybody returning to Afghanistan now.
And to answer your earlier question, this is a self-funded investigation. You asked about our resources. The only resources we had were the resources that we could come up with. So we had no support in this investigation whatsoever.
Really? Does that include your time on the committee, or when you were working with the committee? Did they support you, or they just were trying to tap into what you already knew?
They had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, the committee wasn't doing oversight of the FBI's investigation. That wasn't exactly in their purview. So they were doing kind of an oversight of the events in real time as they occurred. I don't think there's actually been any effective oversight ever of the failure of the FBI investigation into our attacks.
And how about the CIA? Are they continuing to, I mean, because as you know better than most, the FBI is largely a domestic agency, and CIA is charged with everything from the shoreline on.
That's
Are
not
the
actually how
CIA going after these folks?
No, that's not how it works. When FBI takes over investigation, which they did in this case because it killed Americans, it becomes solely an FBI investigation, and CIA takes a step back because they don't want to affect how evidence is collected, chain of custody, and those things. So actually, this falls solely on the FBI.
That's interesting. That's very interesting because, as you well know, the CIA has certainly more assets in places like Libya and Afghanistan and whatnot than the FBI does.
Yeah, we have personal opinions that FBI should not be doing these investigations that involve the deaths of American overseas. Because like you said, they have limited resources. They didn't even have a point of contact in Libya at the time when this happened. They obviously have no relationships on the ground. So yeah, it's a broken system. Long time ago, it actually used to be State Department who was in charge of this, or diplomatic security. It got taken over by FBI, and they're not doing it effectively. So we would like to see it return back to diplomatic security, who have the local relationships consistently in these countries, where Americans are killed or kidnapped.
And just to be clear, we have very close friends who are FBI special agents. So in no way are we putting down these hardworking FBI special agents. But as a bureaucracy, there's some things that need to be changed, as I'm sure you're aware of.
Oh, I am, believe me. And I don't take such attacks personally, believe me, because 20 years in the Bureau, just like time in the CIA, you see how the sausage is made and you can see where the flaws clearly lie.
Oh, we spent lots of time talking about CIA flaws, as people know.
Hey guys, if we could, let's do this because we're already in an investigation. Let's take a few giant steps to the rear if we can. And what I've done, guys, if you're in the comments section, there's a link if you want to get Sarah and Boon's book, their investigation, self-funded investigation into what happened in Benghazi and the deaths of 4 amazing Americans, some of the best and the brightest our country's ever produced. If you want to check that out, please click the link right up here in the screen, or you can get the links in the show notes if you want to pick it up on Amazon. But Sarah, Boon, guys, if you could, take us back prior to September the 11th, 2012. What was going on in Libya at the time?
So actually, Libya was changing. It wasn't long after the revolution, and there was a void, a gap that was rapidly being filled by Al-Qaeda, which was unbeknownst to us. So personally, for me, from my perspective, being down in Benghazi, we gradually started to see an increase in violence throughout the city. A lot of the other foreigners were leaving. They were closing their embassies. Attacks started to increase. Also on the British consulate as well. The Brits were attacked several months before we were actually attacked at the U.S. consulate. The black flag was starting to be seen in neighborhoods where predominantly you just didn't see the black flag. So increasingly, it started to get worse and worse.
Yeah, and I actually went to Libya first, to Tripoli, the capital, in January of 2012, and I started working against terrorists there. And then I relocated to Benghazi in August. And like Boon said, Al-Qaeda had basically done this really smart thing. They're basically doing the same thing with the Taliban now in Afghanistan. They set up assassination units that would take out anyone who wanted to join what would be an official government service. Obviously, Afghanistan's the prior government service. So if you wanted to join the police, they would assassinate you. If you wanted to join the army, if you wanted to become a judge, because they wanted to counter any influence. So obviously, they also then wanted to counter the Western influence at the time. And the Al-Qaeda member who sent that up, his name is Abu Nas al-Libi, and he had been involved in the attacks back in the day against our Kenya and Tanzania embassies.
Yeah, I think most Americans may not even remember those attacks on our embassies, and I believe they were simultaneous attacks in 2 different countries, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was such a big event. The FBI actually sent 1,000 agents to Africa to investigate it. For example, our investigation, they sent 3. So just to show at the time how big those embassy bombings were, and how they were such a priority of the United States to go after the attackers.
Now, Dr. Fuller, domestic investigation is one thing. What, if anything, changes when you're doing an international investigation like something like that?
Oh, obviously a lot. I mean, from being overseas in the military, there's a status of forces agreement that governs your actions as a military member, what you can do, what you can't do, what laws apply to you locally, what laws don't apply to you. I don't know that there's a status of forces agreement that gets put into place when agencies, OGA shows up, us, CIA, DEA. This question I asked when I first showed up in Guantanamo Bay was like, okay, what is my legal authorization to do what I'm doing? Same thing I asked when I got to Afghanistan. Never did get a really clear answer. So your status is very odd. You don't go over on a diplomatic passport. At least I didn't. You went over on a government passport. So you don't have that veil of protection. And you don't, oftentimes don't know the language. I mean, I can get by in a few languages, and Pashtun and Dari are not amongst them. So conducting an investigation in the wilds of Afghanistan, you're adding in, you have to have an interpreter. That adds another layer of difficulty. And then what are your parameters? What can I do? What can I not do? It becomes rather difficult, and you don't know the lay of the land. I mean, as has been sort of hinted at by the other guests and I, is that, unless you live there, unless you are on the ground 24/7, 365, you just don't know who are the players. Who are the players in this neighborhood? Who runs the show around here? Boon mentions, okay, we're seeing black flags. Okay, who's got them? Right? I mean, the military guy's like, okay, there's a black flag, smoke it. Right? That's very simple, very clear cut. But if you're conducting intelligence operations or investigations, it's important to know who that person is. What's the context in which they're carrying that flag? What is going on in this neighborhood? All right. There are neighborhoods in Charlotte, North Carolina, that if you whirl into them wearing a blue bandana, you're going to get shot. Right. Yeah. Well, the same thing applies in neighborhoods in Libya. I mean, I don't know the different neighborhoods in Libya. I can find Benghazi on a map. I can find Tripoli on a map, but I can't tell you what goes on in what neighborhood, who's going to be cooperative, who's not. So it gets very, very complicated very, very quickly when you just drop people in and you're completely reliant on the locals. And if you don't have the context in which to understand how those locals are operating, it's a very, very tough row to hoe.
And I think that's a great segue, Dr. Fuller, because I was going to say, that I would imagine the CIA, the FBI, some of these other OGAs, they probably hire folks and select for people that are very comfortable in the gray, in that moral ambiguity, the complexity. But I think that may have led to some of the problems you guys have. What was the name of the militia that was tasked with conducting the exterior physical security of the annex and the other things over there?
It was the 17th February Martyrs Brigade, but they were only charged with protecting the consulate, not the CIA annex. But they had a very close personal relationship with the chief of base, so that's CIA's boss in Benghazi, and he relied on them in a way that wouldn't be unnatural in other in other CIA bases. It was a personal relationship, vice really the professional one that you should have.
Most places overseas, like when it comes to a consulate or an embassy, the responsibility for physical security is actually that host country.
Mm-hmm. And Boon, I'm imagining Benghazi wasn't your first rodeo by any stretch. So
no,
that Martyrs Brigade, relative to some of the other host nation exterior physical security, what was your relationship with them, or what were they like?
So we never trusted them. You have to understand who the militias were and why they were there. So it was after the revolution. But what a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of the militias that helped overthrow Gaddafi were not just regular Libyans. A lot of them are actually criminals and terrorists who were released from prisons. Most of the Libyans weren't hardened fighters. They didn't have a strong military. So they were relying on these militias to help with the overthrowing of Gaddafi. So we never trusted any of the militias. And quite like Afghanistan in the early days, there were multiple militias who had problems with each other as well, and still do today in Libya.
Dr. Fuller, when you were in Afghanistan with the The FBI. What was your relationship to the host nation physical security folks?
Watch their hands. To echo his point, you couldn't trust them. We kept them outside all the compounds. That included the CIA compounds that I was traveling to. It included all the military compounds. You use them as your sort of initial ablative shielding, right? Because they did recognize people. They could speak to people. They could tell the truck driver who took a wrong turn, hey, this is the wrong gate, go somewhere else. But any vehicle they cleared, we cleared, right? I mean, our own people cleared. You watched them. And of course, when you don't, you had incidences where things go sideways.
Yeah.
Right. And you've on the show have shown video of that attack in, where was it? Saudi. We've had the CIA officers killed with the car bombing, the suicide bombing that rolled in the gate. I mean, it happens over and over and over again. You simply can't trust them. And even honestly, the Afghans, and I was never in Libya, but I'm sure having lived in that part of the world a lot, they had the same sort of attitudes. They're your best friend today. Somebody shows up with a suitcase full of money tomorrow, they switch sides. I mean, like that, their loyalty, and they see it as perfectly acceptable. That is a perfectly acceptable business arrangement. I got paid. Yeah, it's time to go to the other side. That's why the Army and I know the agency were running around with suitcases full of money and in Afghanistan and just buying people off, because it was a much more economical way to get things done. It was a faster way to get things done. And I don't know if that was the case in Libya, but I assume it was.
So let me ask you this, Sarah. What was was Libya a mess created by the U.S. State Department? Then now this shit sandwich, if you will, is now handed off to the agency, or what was the strategic implications of why you guys were there at the annex?
Yeah, it actually was U.S. policy that started this problem, but it was back in 2006 and 2008. It was then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. So what they did is they went to Gaddafi and said, hey, we want to open relationships with you to the West. One of the things you need to do to open this relationship is to release these individuals from these prisons. The main prison was Abu Salim prison. That's where all of our attackers were. Where there's probably about, I'd say 40% of our attackers were in this prison at the time in 2006 and 2008. Gaddafi had to start releasing these terrorists to open relationships with the West. That includes the US, the NATO, the UN. And so then it was the release of these terrorists that by 2011 formed the actual base then that went after him and attacked him. So people actually lose that nuance completely. So then in 2011 is when we got asked by Libyans, as you can imagine, to then do something to support their revolution. And we were given a piece of information. If it's true or not, I don't know, because the information came from an individual who also had kind of ties to Al-Qaeda. And he gave information to, at the time, Chris Stevens, went to Hillary Clinton and went to Nicolas Sarkozy, saying Gaddafi was going to do a massacre of the city of Benghazi. And it was that piece of information that brought the U.S. into the Libyan revolution. And then we did mostly an air campaign to support the revolutionaries. But like Boon said, these revolutionaries were not like the democratic free people that you've been told. Yes, they were among them, but Al-Qaeda was a very powerful role in this revolution. And now the Libyan government is aligned with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has a safe haven in the capital of Tripoli, and the U.S. is aligned with the Al-Qaeda side of the government in Libya because of this continued failed policy.
Okay, so now we've kind of got an overview of the lay of the land here, and so take us, if you would, Boon, Sarah, whoever wants to start this. What's it like there on the ground on the morning of September 11th, 2012?
All right, so this is hard to describe unless you've been in those environments. So the environment was normal. Now, our baseline for normal isn't your regular baseline for something that's normal. So from our perspective, there was no glaring threats for that day. We had intelligence that, hey, something bad might happen because it's 9/11. Well, the entire world had that same intelligence. We didn't have any specific intelligence to tell us, hey, you're going to be attacked tonight. But things were a little weird, things were a little heightened just because it was 9/11. And we took preparations to prepare for that. So it was business as usual for the most part, but there were some odd happenstances that were happening around the consulate, not the annex, like surveillance on it, which I believe was in the book 13 Hours. And I think they kind of showcased that in the movie as well, very briefly. But other than that, it was business as usual, nothing out of the ordinary for our baseline.
Yeah, and the concerning part is, though, that surveillance was actually done by the local police force. Their job was they sat like the vehicle out in front of the embassy gate. I know you've seen that at embassies, right? So that police force was the one actually caught doing the surveillance in the morning. And then when we did our investigation and watched the camera, it's really interesting. They cover for the head commander who leads the attack the first hour as he coalesces outside the consulate off camera, and then they move and he attacks. So they were involved the whole time, and that was another element that was supposed to be protecting the consulate with an insider threat. There was 3 elements at the consulate with insider threats. There was 17 February Martyrs Brigade, who was the outside security and had over 25 terrorists at the attack. There was the Blue Mountain Group. They were the armed security that the U.S. government paid for. I mean, the unarmed that they paid for, the private security company. They had terrorists at the attack. A very famous one was just detained this fall, Faraj Shaku. And then the police force, which was called the Supreme Security Committee, they were involved. So all 3 security elements at the consulate were involved in the attack.
Dr. Fuller?
No, it's interesting because I've watched those videos, and you can see, as things coalesce, obviously there are things that happen off camera, but it's interesting to note that all 3 levels of security were at the very least next to worthless once the attack got rolling, and at worst complicit in the process. And it really kind of left a gaping wound in the perimeter security of the compound when the assault started happening. And it's funny because I've watched those videos enough that some of the people that make it through the gate, they look surprised. If you look at their faces, and I'm sure you two have seen the videos where they're like, well, that was easy, right? I mean, they're shocked at how fast and easy they got through the exterior perimeter because so many of the guards that were there took leg bail and headed on down the road.
Yeah, there was only a few shots taken at the initial attackers, and that was it. And I think the most that happened is one got shot in the foot. So yeah, there was no resistance to rush the U.S. consulate, unfortunately.
What's interesting is that they actually had no intentions of hurting any Muslims. It wasn't their goal. What a lot of people don't understand is that it was actually a kidnapping attempt for Ambassador Stevens.
Okay, so Boon, I got a question for you, man. When you were there, what was your communication? Because DSS was charged with protecting the ambassador. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, so what was your relationship with DSS? Were y'all on the same frequencies? Were y'all monitoring each other's net? I mean, what was that relationship like prior to the event?
So officially, we had no relationship. Unofficially, we had a very strong relationship. So everything was done with, a head nod and a handshake, just because we were Americans serving together in close proximity. So we had no responsibility for State Department's mission there. Again, it was just, a head nod and a handshake. Now, having said that, we actually went over to the consulate at least once a week where they would come over and eat dinner with us. So we had a very close relationship. It just wasn't an official relationship.
Yeah, and there are 2 other key parts, like your question about the radios. We had radio communication, and also we were doing like some work against the consulate for them because they believe some of their some of their guards were terrorists. And so it was me, Tig, and Oz. We were doing kind of a side project with them to prove that so they could send it to their leadership and solve the problem. So we did also have, like he said, a head nod, not official work going with them against some of their threats.
Okay, that opens up a great door that I was not aware of, guys, and that is, and maybe Dr. Fuller, if you have some follow-on questions. So you and Tig and Oz are running this side unofficial investigation into the guys working the perimeter, because evidently their spidey senses were going off, or they had some sort of information that something was amiss, rightly so, it would turn out. Had you made any headway on that? Can you speak to any of the, like, hey, yeah, we've identified that this guy, he's a construction worker at the same place where this other known terrorist used to work, or anything like that?
Well, the best way to put it is we were doing technical collection. Tig did one the morning of the attacks on 9/11, actually. What happened is he actually handed it off to our chief of base, Bob. Bob took it with him when they departed. He brought it to Tripoli and didn't actually tell anyone he had it. It was maybe about 10 days later then Tig asked me what the results of the collect was. And I had to like hunt it down, and it was like in Bob's bedroom. So if he ever put that forward, and if anyone ever actually looked at it and compared it to past collects, I have no idea if the agency headquarters did it, but we did do some collection that you could have done that work on, especially really would have probably been helpful to an effective investigation into our attacks.
Dr. Fuller?
Yeah, they bring up a really interesting point that we kind of passed there, is that those interpersonal relationships are critical. I mean, for example, our relationship with the agency in Afghanistan, we didn't have an official one, but we were, you know, our racks were pretty close to each other. Our hooches were pretty close to each other. We'd eat together. We would, you know, have barbecues together. We'd shoot the breeze, and something would pop up on one radar. You unofficially have a conversation and say, "Hey, Boon, we heard about this. You hear anything about that?" And, you know, he's, well, no, I haven't heard anything about that today, but I'll check into it, you know, just to give a heads up. And the fewer there are of you, you know, that circle of trust shrinks, right? I mean, I can't tell you, I was at a bombing one time, a suicide bombing. I was so freaking happy when I saw American troops roll in. You know, I didn't know the first thing about them. I just knew they had American patches on their shoulder. I was like, thank God, right? And, you know, I don't care what religion you are, what color, I don't care what your pronouns are. I give a shit about any of that. I'm just happy that there's another American here. And we're all in this, you know, we're all in the same shit ocean together, right? So we're going to talk to each other, and we're going to share that information. Official policies be damned. You know, that's just going to happen. And I think far too often that gets overlooked, the importance of those relationships and the critical nature of that communication. Because if you rely solely upon official communications, the whole system is just going to break down because of things like you were saying with Bob. He gets the information and he's not being malicious. He just doesn't pass it on. Well, that's a problem, right? So those communications that you have, those relationships that you build between agencies and between organizations and just between people in these environments especially are absolutely critical.
So, yeah, I 100% agree with that. I'm sure Boone and Sarah would agree with it too, Dr. Fuller. But so we're back there. This is the morning, September 11th. As you said, Boone, it's the usual for that kind of an environment. So walk us through the day. When did things start getting weird?
Again, you know, our baseline is different. So, I mean, you know, every day was weird, but for myself personally, myself and Tonto were actually on a QRF that day. So we weren't running around town like the other guys were. We were actually just waiting in case they needed us. So for us, honestly, it was just a day of listening to the radio, playing video games, working out, and eating chow.
But the thing that was different that day is the ambassador was in town, right? He had come to town. They chose to keep him on the consulate compound that day for his security. So basically the US CIA people were supplementing anything to do with the ambassador during his visit. And so we were stretched a little thin, as you can imagine, because we kept people like Boone stayed longer on his tour to support this. And the CIA was helping to support the things the ambassador was working on the few days he was in town.
In those environments, that's a big deal, right? The ambassador pops up in an outlying location like Benghazi. they're going to tell the CIA. DSS is going to tell the CIA just for no other reason than, hey, there's only 4 of us. There's maybe 4 or 8 of you. If something goes high and right, we'd like you to know, hey, by the way, the ambassador's in town. We could probably use some help.
Yeah, but it was more difficult than that, because what happened is on the 9th, 2 of the big key militias actually told the State Department, we're no longer going to secure your safety in the city of Benghazi. We're no longer going to support your moves in the city of Benghazi. So as you can imagine, if you just take a couple people from Tripoli to Benghazi, they don't know how to get around town. So CIA then had to support his moves because the local forces refused to and had stopped. And that probably should have canceled his trip immediately, but he still came, and we took over for what those local forces were supposed to do for the ambassador.
And I'm interested why DSS wouldn't put their foot down and say, this is not a good idea. And why do you suppose he insisted on going to an area that was suddenly so much more of a heightened risk? I mean, has your investigation kind of sussed that out? Why that trip still happened?
It's not really our investigation that sussed it out. It was Select Committee in Benghazi. But we knew this in real time being there. So Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State at the time, was coming to Benghazi in October. So most of the work being done between the CIA annex and the consulate at the time were making plans and preparations and doing site visits to find a new location to make a combined annex consulate, to make like an official diplomatic security position there. And it was really important to Ambassador Stevens, and this was the last chance he had to get that cemented for her October visit, to get her to approve the funding to build a new consulate there.
It's also important to note on the DSS side. So the DSS guys actually put in a lot of requests for increased security months before the event even happened. And they documented very well the attacks leading up to that night. And they had many security requests for more personnel, increased fortifications for the facility before that night even happened. Where that went, I don't know. Why that was shot down, I have no idea. That's a State Department issue. But the DSS guys were very proactive in requesting what they needed. They just didn't get it.
And when he says lots, they sent over 600 requests in less than 6 months. So lots is a whole nother level of begging for some security help here.
Yeah, I'm laughing because it's the same in every bureaucracy, right? It's not until somebody dies that something happens, right? We don't need budgets, staffing. There's all kinds of bureaucratic excuses until we're stacking bodies. Then all of a sudden, oh my God, we got to fix this.
The interesting thing is, though, that the consulate in Benghazi was actually downgraded. Several months prior, there was actually an SST there that did have the means to secure the facility and had the personnel to provide the correct response. They were taken off, though, and then again, it was denied for them to come back.
Yeah, for people who don't know, the SST, when he's referring to that, it's kind of just like the more elite unit of the diplomatic security. So it's almost like if like the CIA's GRS, right? They're on that elevated level of training, 20 years in special ops. Like that is who used to protect the consulate until this period.
Sure. But nothing happened. So we clearly don't need them there, right?
Well, things did happen. There was an attack on the consulate in the spring. And so in I believe it was April, there was an attack on the consulate and they blew a hole in the wall. So there actually were ongoing attacks and threats. They just downgraded it because it's the State Department and they don't take security seriously.
Okay, so for those that maybe have probably seen the movie 13 Hours, some of the things on there, it appeared as though, and I can't remember from the book, was there 3 or 4 DSS guys there for Ambassador Stevens, or was there actually more on the ground? What can you speak to that?
So if I recall correctly, there were 2 that came with Ambassador Stevens, and then the other 3 or 4 were actually stationed in Benghazi. So there was a total of 6.
And the attack happened first on the Ambassador Stevens' compound. At the time, were you guys under attack at all, or or was you guys just still nobody knew you guys were really there?
No, so there's multiple answers for that. One, everybody knew where both locations were.
Okay.
We're kind of hiding in plain sight, if you will, but everyone knew, hey, Americans were on this compound, Americans were on that compound. So it wasn't secret, as far as the attack goes. So there were two separate attackers, or two separate groups that attacked us. That's what a lot of people don't understand. One attack on the consulate was separate. The attack on the annex was actually a separate attack. We can get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, Boone. I'm glad you said that, because I don't know that I was tracking that. Were you, Dr. Fuller?
Oh yeah, yes, I was, but only because of, I mean, not because of what's happened on the show, but
because inside baseball.
Inside baseball.
And that's another great point that you made, Boone, is that, it's one of those, the worst kept secret in Benghazi is that there's two American groups here. And just so people are clear, the consulate, when you guys say consulate, we're talking about Ambassador Stevens and his DSS, the Diplomatic Security Service guys protecting him. And then there's the annex where the agency and the GRS guys were. And you guys are about how far apart?
Mile and a half ish.
The longest mile and a half in history, I would imagine. So when the attack happens, what's going on over the comms net? Is it chaos? Is it, hey, this is kind of getting a little dicey? What are y'all guys hearing?
So actually, we had a lot of things going on. We had a team that was out, and then most of our teams were coming in for the night. So we were starting to wind down, get ready for bed once everyone came in. So we were just kind of hanging out, waiting for that. We got a call, hey, we need all you guys into the office. So we're thinking, hey, they just want to debrief us on what's going on in Egypt. So we just kind of mosey on over there, and then we get a more urgent call on the radio. Hey, we need everyone in the office right now. So we're like, oh, okay, something's up. As we walk outside, because we are so close to the consulate, we can actually hear the commotion of the attack going on. So then we all rush into the office, and then we're briefed on what's going on. We switch our freaks to the State Department freaks, and then we have direct communications with DSS. And that's when they're on the radio, pleading for us to come help them. Finally, we get a plea one more time. Hey, if you guys don't come right now, we're all going to die.
Okay. And who was the team lead of the GRS? Was it Tyrone?
No. So the GRS team leader cannot be named.
Okay.
We did have a team leader. If you watch the movie, the team leader in the movie is more than one character. So Tyrone Woods was one of our team leaders, but he was an ATL. He was an assistant team leader. But during that night, he was in fact our team leader.
Okay. And in the movie, Bob is kind of a tool bag. Was he really a tool bag in real life?
I'll answer that before Sarah does. So I'm probably one of the few people who actually got along with Bob. Bob, in my opinion, and again, a lot of people disagree with me. In my opinion, Bob wasn't a malicious person. He was just very risk averse and very incompetent. And that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's the problem. So this was only Bob's second war zone, and let's just say he got sent home from his first war zone for some sort of dead asset money cover up. Okay, they were at the bottom of the bench. They had no one to send to Benghazi. They sent the actual chief of base home early, and Bob was supposed to be a 1 month fill-in. And at that point, I think we were at like month 9. So Bob never should have been in that position. He was in over his head. He had no clue what was going on the ground. It was like beyond incompetence. Like he was meeting the people who attacked us. He bromanced with terrorists and thought it was cool because he never got to do it in his life. He was the wrong person at the wrong time to be in that environment. And really someone in CIA should have been held responsible for putting him in that position, to be honest.
A lot of the guys feel that, he was a malicious person. I don't think that was the case. I just really think he was incompetent.
Never, what is it? Never subscribe to malice, what can easily be explained with incompetence or something like that. So when you guys get your brief, do you immediately kit up and get ready, or you're staged in the vehicles? I mean, I'm sure you had a deliberate plan and maybe a hasty plan, or was it just all hasty plan? What was the thought there, Boon?
No, we planned for everything. Prior plan prevents poor performance. So we had a plan for everything. As we're getting briefed, we're already jocking up. We were ready to go in less than 5 minutes.
Okay.
Then that's in the vehicles, running with a plan, ready to go.
Yeah, and then when you watch the video, they're sitting in the vehicles as they wait approval. So it's a very disconcerting thing to watch, as you can imagine, after the fact, knowing that they're ready to go and they're not going.
What kind of ISR did you have in the sky that day?
So we didn't until later. And then later on, once we did have it on station, it was pretty useless to us for multiple failures when it comes to communication.
Dr. Fuller, you got any questions on that one?
No, I mean, the feeds that you'd get are they're useful historically speaking. I'm sure you watched them as part of the subcommittee stuff. They were coming over all the time to watch. Staff members were coming over to watch the videos all the time. And at least as far as I saw, we didn't have any eyes in the sky until later on, as Boon said. Didn't have it initially. We were just, from the historical video perspective, we only really had contemporaneous video from the security cameras the CCTVs that were on the various compounds.
Yeah, there was ISR for 3 of the attacks. So there was ISR. It arrived probably around 11 p.m. It had been over in the eastern part of Libya, over Darna, and so it took, an hour plus to be moved. And so it arrived around 11. So we did have ISR of the 3 attacks on the U.S. consulate. And then, I obviously was in country, so I was involved, and we got the copies of the consulate and the annex surveillance footage. So I saw those a week after the attacks while in Libya. So, we had our hands on those pretty quick, and then we, sent them back to the United States.
So what was the rationale, guys, as far as like who was vacillating on sending someone to try to get Ambassador Stevens out? What was the thought process as to why you guys weren't allowed to roll over there?
So that's complicated to answer because there's so many different friction points that were involved. So when you look at Benghazi, you have to look at the totality of circumstances. Mm-hmm. So there were issues on the agency side, which is separate. There were issues on the State Department side, which were separate. There were glaring issues on the DoD side, which are completely separate. And then there were issues with the National Command Authority, the White House. So you have 4 separate issues, 4 separate friction points that all came together to create the perfect storm. So you have to kind of look at that before you start answering some of these questions. One of the big one is it's a stand down. The stand down always gets mixed up. There's a stand down for the military, there's a stand down for us. And you really have to break those down and look at them for what they were. We were delayed. We knew for a fact that we were going that night, but we were misled. We were misled by our team leader, and we were misled by Bob. They intentionally delayed us. If we would have known that in hindsight, we would have just went right away. So Tig was told to stand down. The rest of us were intentionally delayed.
Right, but the one thing that the team fails to acknowledge is when Bob, the first phone call that Bob made that night was to 17 February, and it was to send me a backup force. And on that first phone call, the head of 17 February, who is a terrorist, by the way, he'd been also in Abu Salim prison, he said, "We have no assistance to send you. We're not sending you any help." Remember, this is a militia of 5,000 people. So Bob knew on that first phone call, he wasn't getting backup. So he was lying to them while he was not letting them depart, telling them they're waiting on a group he knew wasn't coming. And so that really gets lost in the nuance of this. But I think people need to understand that they were held up because they were being lied to, not because Bob was actually trying to get them assistance.
He was intentionally delaying us.
Okay, so there's a couple things here. I love the fact that Boon, you kind of compartmentalized. There was a DoD issue, there was a this issue, there was a multifaceted problem, and I was in Naples, Italy, a couple of years ago. My good friend was a colonel there, a Marine Corps colonel, and he sits in a skiff all day long and monitors these kind of things. And he was the button to push in case there's a DoD response for something like this. And that's one of the things that's been put in place since what happened to you guys on the ground in Benghazi. So I want to say the DoD has kind of plugged that hole, or at least they've got a guy there who has the authority. And Boone is going, no, hell no, they haven't plugged the hole, right?
But one thing people don't realize is DoD made the wrong assessment that night, and it's one of the reasons they really failed to respond. So there was a hostage situation in January of 2012. I believe it was in Mali. I forget exactly where, but it involved Somalia, and it involved a woman named Jessica Buchanan. They put a con op together at that time. So the night of Benghazi, they decided this is the exact same situation. They pulled that plan off the shelf. It was called Con Op 0300, and they started running this old plan without really making sure it was the same situation. You know, they made assumptions. And that's the thing. If you have leaders making bad decisions, you can put everything you want, you know, into effect. You can bring airplanes into all these places. We didn't have them in Benghazi, but if they're not making the right assessment and they're not moving resources in a timely manner, which they weren't, because they said this is a hostage situation, we have multiple days to deal with this. No, these were ongoing terrorist attacks. You didn't. And so it's a leadership problem. And until you get leaders who view it that way, you haven't solved it.
Amen.
Yeah, as Sarah's saying, and to talk about your point about, you know, they plug some of those holes. So we've had solutions for these problems since the 80s. They just weren't enacted correctly. For instance, there was no AFRICOM SIF at that time. They created one after the fact, and then they continued to disband them after the fact. But it was 10th Group SIF's responsibility. On 9/11, 10th Group SIF, Commanders in Extremist Force, which is like their in extremist hostage rescue team, until the special mission units can get there from the United States, they were actually on a training mission in Europe. Their air asset was taken apart for maintenance. The crew for that air asset was on crew rest. So there's multiple failures here.
And isn't AFRICOM's headquarters still in Germany?
Yes.
Does that make sense to anybody?
Yes.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I would be very interested to know how that conversation went with Bob in the compound at the time, because my experience with a carload or a couple carloads of pipe hitters know that there's a firefight going on a mile away and that they are the only people that can get there in time to have any impact to save these people. Restraining those guys like Boone, you and your colleagues, that's no small feat. You know, I mean, you've got to, you know, the good news for somebody that's trying to restrain you is that these are disciplined troops. The bad news is they're disciplined troops straining at the leash to get out the gate. And I would be very, very interested to know, how the hell did Bob keep from just getting run over by the cars? You guys run out the gate.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. So again, like I said, most of this information for me is hindsight. It's after the fact. We didn't have a lot of this information in real time. So Bob was part of the problem, but our team leader, who we trusted, who was part of the team, was also part of the problem. So if we would have known that, hey, we were intentionally being delayed at that time, yeah, we would have left. We'd have left Bob, and we would have left our team leader, which eventually we kind of did. We just weren't aware of what was going on. We were being told false information, and the false information kind of made sense during that time. But once we were losing the initiative, we heard what was going on. We're still not responding. We questioned it. The conversations back and forth from everyone on the team, individually between Bob and our team leader, were very aggressive.
I imagine so.
Right. The language was very colorful. But again, we put a lot of faith into our team leader, and we had no idea that we were actually being delayed.
And how many of you were there?
I'm sorry?
How many of you were there?
There were 6 of us, to include the team leader.
Yeah, I mean, again, watching those initial videos as a former infantry guy, if the 6 of you had rolled in there early on in that attack, armed as you were, angry as you would have been, motivated as you would have been, it would have had a devastating impact on that attack.
Yeah, well, we already did the timeline, and if they would have left when they were in the cars and ready to go, actually the fire would never even been started on the compound the ambassador was in, because obviously the attackers would have went after them. The fire was only started after so many attempts to get into the building he was in. So a lot of people don't understand that there wasn't a fire initially started at a guard gate right inside that had no effect on the ambassador's compound. So yes, the fire at least would not have been started that killed the ambassador and Sean Smith.
Yeah, and the DSS guys that were on the compound in the videos I've seen were very much in a defensive mindset. I think that if you guys had hit that in an offensive mindset, 6 highly motivated, well-trained pipe hitters roll into that crowd early on when their attack is very disjointed. And again, I think they were surprised by the ease at which they got through the gates. I think if you guys had hit them in a flank or in the rear and come in there like the wrath of God, it would have broken that whole thing up. And we may not have even seen the remaining attacks that evening.
Actually, if you watch the video, it was just one event that made all the attackers leave the compound. It was TIG. Boon had told them to shoot like a 40 mic. It went over the compound like a flare. Every single attacker ran off the compound from something flaring over the compound. So it just shows you when you respond with force, the success you could have. And that is why small units in the U.S. government do such a good job in these situations against terrorists. Like we said, there was 150 attackers at that compound. Half of them were on the compound and half of them were barricading the streets around it.
Yeah, well, the ones that we ran into in Afghanistan were very, very good at killing women and children, civilians, people who surrendered, people that were on their knees already captured. When they ran into people who'd come to fight and knew what they were doing, it was a whole nother animal. And I think the 6 of you guys, had you not been restrained, I think it would have had a significant impact on that evening and how things would have gone that night.
We like to believe that, but again, hindsight, if
Fair
we
enough.
would have known that, we would have left earlier.
Hey, so Boon, when did you guys finally get taken off the leash? What was the catalyst or the impetus for, all right, go, open the gate, let them go? What was that?
It was that final call from State Department that, hey, if you guys don't come here right now, we're all going to die. And that's when we very colorfully told our team leader, get in the car, we're going with you or without you. And we left.
So you go, there's actions on the objectives, you get in there, and I believe at some point you can't figure out where the ambassador is. Is that correct?
So yes and no. We navigated our way over there. We split up in 2 teams so we could kind of hit it kind of like an L shape and flank when we came in. Mm-hmm. We split up and we encountered fire from the road. TIG fired the 40 mic, which was very effective. Then we went and moved into the compound. Once we get to the compound, we're clearing structures, looking for Americans, attempting to link up with DSS. The first team went into the burning building looking for the ambassador. And then we had a second team that was still clearing buildings, making sure all the threats were gone. So there's a lot going on before we actually knew whether the ambassador was missing. We're still searching for him. We ended up finding Sean Smith, unfortunately deceased. We were unable to find Ambassador Stevens, and we came to 2 conclusions. Either he was taken, or if he is in the burning building, he can't survive. He couldn't have survived, so he would have been deceased at that time. And unfortunately, that was the outcome, that he suffocated from smoke inhalation.
And he shows up at a Libyan hospital. Was it that night or the next day, or what was that?
Yeah, I actually spoke to that person. So what happened is around 1:30 in the morning, some Libyans, now all the attackers are gone by this point. Like there's people attacking the consulate, but this is all locals, nosy neighbors at this point. There's no terrorists on the compound. And they're going around from building to building to see kind of what happened. And a person in the building finds an American kind of like on the ground next to a bed, and he comes out and he sees a man with a weapon, and it was a Libyan army officer who had kind of been working. He's one of the street cops. He works like intersections, and he came to be nosy. And he said, "Can you come in? You have a weapon. There seems to be a man inside. Something's wrong here." They go in and they carry him out, and then you see this part where they're carrying him out. This is on video, and this is, this became very public. And they kind of set him down when they walk out of his villa, and they think he's alive, and they're all like, "Allah Akbar," right? He's alive, he's breathing. They pick him back up because then they realize we got to bring him to the hospital. As they go to leave to bring him to the hospital, a neighbor that knows the ambassador sees them. He takes custody of the body and brings him to the hospital. So it was actually a friend of Stevens, a neighbor who knew him well, that brought him to the hospital. So Stevens was only basically handled by Good Samaritans, and they transferred him in a meaningful way. But the individual you see in the video with the phone and holding him starts calling everybody in the phone to say, "Hey, we brought one of your Americans to the hospital," because he didn't know who he was. The neighbor did, but the neighbor didn't tell the rest of the people. So he said, "Hey, we brought an American." So a lot of the people on the ground thought this is a ruse. The terrorists are trying to entrap us at a hospital to attack us there. They made all these assumptions. So it wasn't even taken completely serious at first.
How was his body recovered? Did Americans recover it? Was he brought to, how was that?
So it was through some contacts that he was brought to us at the airport.
Yeah, but we should really get into that because that is important. So the Ministry of Interior, as you can imagine, who it's their job to safeguard our consulate, they worked with our government to bring the body. The individual, though, who brought the body was an ally of the consulate. His name is Mustafa al-Saglisi. He used to be one of the heads of 17th February Martyrs Brigade. His brother, Khalid, was one of the attackers at our attacks that night. So just to show you how enmeshed this was, the good guy that brought the body, his brother was the reason the body exists, right? That is a huge problem.
Wow. No, that's crazy. So at this point, that Boon, that you guys are there, have the State Department, the CIA, and Tripoli already been notified? Or are they tracking this the entire time? Are they trying to get you assets? What's going on back in Tripoli?
So before we responded, the State Department did very well communicating what was going on. Once we responded and evacuated the State Department personnel, they were no longer communicating back to Tripoli. This is where the agency communication failure comes into play. On our side, our people, Bob in particular, actually didn't even tell Team Tripoli that we responded until after the fact. And then that's why the timeline gets messed up so much. So our communication was not being transmitted in a timely manner.
Was Tripoli in the same time zone as Benghazi or different?
They're the same.
Same time zone.
Okay, same time zone. And Tripoli, if I remember from the book and the movie, there were some JSOC assets there that could assist. And I believe they did, and they got money and got a plane. Is that accurate?
No, it's not. No. So
Okay,
just so the audience understands, so the movie did a very good job of showing the human side of the team and what the team was going through from their perspective only, without the totality of circumstances. It was also a movie that was trying to capture the feeling of what was going on. Now, the movie is probably about 80%, 85% accurate, but there was a lot of discrepancies in the movie. So the JSOC guys who were there, they decided to go with us of their own initiative. They weren't sent as a DoD response. We ate together, we worked out together, just like us responding to the State Department. You know, we're fellow Americans. Your guys are in a firefight. Hey, we're going with you to help you. That was a JSOC response. So it was unofficial. Two solid dudes just decided to help. As far as the money goes and the aircraft goes, that was actually done by the agency.
Okay.
In the movie, they show Bub doing that. They didn't represent Bub very well in the movie, in our opinion. Bub did not do that, and there was a Tripoli team leader. Again, Bub's character was a combination of several different people, if you will. But yes, the agency secured the plane and the money.
Yeah, and we actually do have, as you can imagine, our investigation hasn't covered a lot of things, and unfortunately, how we brought up the U.S. government is aligned with Al Qaeda in Tripoli. Well, the two DoD officers that actually joined Team Tripoli called one of their points of contact in Tripoli, who unfortunately, as you can imagine, was aligned with the terrorists. So he made a call to Benghazi and said, hey, we need you to help this partner of ours that we have this joint relationship with. We need you to, his name is General Hassani that called over. We need you to help this American team when they arrive on the ground. The phone call was actually made to Wissam bin Hamid, who we told you ended up being the mastermind of our CIA annex attacks. So he became infuriated. He's like, I don't want any more Americans in my city. And he actually said very loudly, he was actually watching the attacks at the time. And so there are Libyans who have heard him. And he basically said loudly, I'm going to kill all the Americans tonight. And that's when he decided to plan the mortar attack on our annex. So you have to, so there's a lot of things happening that night that kind of like implode together.
I do want to talk about the mortar attack because I think that's incredibly important, and that's where you guys lost 2 guys at the annex, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Dr. Fuller, does any of that stuff surprise you that Sarah just laid out there?
No, I mean, it's not, it all passes the smell test for me simply because of the complicated nature of that part of the world. Allegiances ebb and flow. And then you've got American bureaucracies overlaid into that. And then people like Boon and his team caught up in the middle of it. And it is the nature of the beast. We all kind of understand it, but it really, really sucks when it comes together like this. And you see this bureaucratic malaise and risk averse behavior impacting into a very pragmatic, distinctly Middle Eastern approach to loyalty. And you end up with dead Americans as a result.
Yeah.
And then the bureaucracy starts the CYA thing. That's not, I don't want to get in trouble. This might be a bump in my career. And we've all seen it in the military. We've seen it in the FBI, the CIA, and other agencies. And it's shameful in my mind. It's absolutely shameful that you don't pin responsibility where it needs to be pinned and correct these mistakes so that we don't repeat them again in the future.
Well, and Sarah, those that are going to listen to the podcast to come can't see Sarah's comment. She says Bob was retired and given the CIA's most prestigious medal. Congratulations, Bob. I read somewhere or heard somewhere, I think there were some Marine fast team elements or maybe even a fast team there in Rota, Spain. And there could have been a response from that security forces detachment there. But I'd read, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, Clinton or somebody at the State Department saying, well, yeah, they can come if they wear civilian attire. They can come if they don't carry firearms, or there was something like that. Is that true or not true?
Well, the 2 things are being conflated here, right? So yes, there was fast teams and 2 deployed from Rota to come. They were actually deployed by the Department of Defense to Tripoli, Libya, not to Benghazi. So anyone saying they were in Benghazi Rescue Force is not correct. That is not officially where they were deployed. They were deployed to Tripoli. The thing is, they did not have airplanes with them in Rota, Spain. So they had to wait for their air assets. So they would not have responded, even if Benghazi was on their orders, they would not have responded to Benghazi in time. They were being sent to Tripoli to protect the embassy in Tripoli. They were not being sent to Benghazi to reinforce the fighters. Now, during that time, Hillary basically did make them change in and out of their clothes, said we don't want them to look like military, but none of that even should have happened. That was just games being played, because in real time, the head of the Libyan Air Force said, send in what you need, send in all assets you need, you have full flight clearances. It didn't include wear a uniform or not. So that was just State Department doing their regular crap, wasting people's time. But again, it did not delay their response because they weren't going to get there in time, if that makes sense. You can't really conflate the 2. She did not stop them in some way from responding in time.
So something else that the American public really don't understand either is so that there's really only 2 responses when it comes to boots on the ground overseas. that's either the SIF, the SF SIF, or the Maritime Special Purpose Force, or the MRF that they call it now, from the Muse with the Marine Corps. FAST is designed to respond to security situations. Although they have the capability and they could do the job, they're not designed for direct action. So they wouldn't have gotten the mission to come and conduct a hostage rescue in Benghazi anyway. They would have been told, hey, go secure that embassy, provide increased security, and then if something else happened, they could respond to it. But that's not what Fast Company actually does. There were no orders given to any DoD unit to respond to Benghazi that night. Any orders that were given were to respond to Tripoli and Tripoli only, not Benghazi. Actually, when we were leaving a day later, going to Germany, we actually passed the 10th Group SIF in the airport.
That's how slow they responded. So the SIF and also the team from North Carolina got there obviously way too late to respond. But we do want to note one of the members of the FAST team does read our ebook. So if you actually get the ebook version of Benghazi Know Thy Enemy, it is one of the Marine FAST team members who responded to Tripoli and obviously then worked with me in Tripoli, because I stayed in Tripoli until November of 2012.
Yeah.
What was the fate of the two JSOC guys that you mentioned earlier, Boon? What ended up happening with them through official channels after the fact?
They were actually, I believe one was given a Naval Cross because he was actually a Marine serving with an Army Special Mission Unit. And the other one was also awarded as well. Nothing negative at all.
Because I thought from the book and maybe even the movie, there's some angst there when the bodies were thrown off the top of the building. Did that truly happen? And was there a lot of hurt feelings over that?
We need to be careful when we discuss this. It actually really bothers Rome's mom, just FYI. So let's just answer it quickly and then move on. This is very difficult for the families, this constant discussion of the bodies.
So just to understand that maybe a couple guys on the team didn't like the way it was handled. I actually didn't have an issue with it because I understood why it was done. And after the fact, they were handled very respectfully after the fact. I've got no angst against the two JSOC guys at all. I actually like both of them very much. There was an active threat. We just got hit by mortars. They wanted to get off those roofs as fast as they possibly could. That's the only reason it was done that way.
And so let's talk about the indirect fire attack, and that because Jaco, who's on this morning, he's a South African military guy. It says, with indirect fire attack, did they have the annex pre-plotted? Asking because I only watched the movie, listened to the podcast Sarah did, have the book, must still work through it.
Yeah, if you're asking if they knew the location of the compound, yes. If you're asking if the mortars were kind of like set in scope prior, no. So what they did is they started planning this attack probably around 10:30, 11 p.m. on the 11th. Basically, the terrorist we talked about, Wissam bin Hamid, he didn't even use his own mortar team in his own organization. He ran what was called the Libya Shield at the time. He actually called up the best mortar team in town. That's how important it was to him. So that 10-man mortar team was actually in an adjacent group to 17 February, like a cell of it. It was called the Rafala al-Sahati Brigade. So then that team got together and dialed in on the compound. But like Boon said, Wissam knew exactly where we were. We were being targeted by someone very familiar with the CIA. He had met many times with our chief of base. He was in the September 9th meeting I told you about with the State Department. So this is someone that knew us well.
Now, from the team perspective, we didn't have that knowledge at the time. We saw several people walking that night, and we thought they were trying to get coordinates. There was also a vehicle as well in the area conducting surveillance, and we thought that maybe they were trying to get coordinates for the annex. So initially, and you'll see that in the movie as well, initially we thought maybe that they got the coordinates that night. After conducting the investigation, we found out that no, they already had the coordinates.
Yeah, as a 0341, when I first started out and being an FO for quite some time, it was a pretty. I mean, I hate to say this about our enemy and people that killed Americans, but it looked like the mortar team was pretty damn good.
They were very effective.
And people don't understand, the mortar team didn't just hit the CIA compound. The CIA compound was multiple buildings. The mortar team hit the CIA skiff. So basically the headquarters building on the compound that looked like all the other buildings. So they even knew the exact building all the classified information was in, and the building the CIA would be seeking cover in. So people need to understand, our enemies, they're well prepared. Even with this ad hoc piece, Al-Qaeda had a lot of planning in their piece of the consulate, but even this ad hoc piece, these guys were dialed in on us. We were their enemy months prior. This was now just their opportunity to take it to us.
You having a background in mortars as well, you would understand that there was actually 2 tubes, not 1 tube. So it was a 2 mortar teams, and a total of 6 rounds were fired, 3 rounds from each tube.
Were they 82 millimeter, or do we know?
I believe they were. I don't know off the top of my head, but I believe that they were.
Okay. And was there any adjusting fire? Because in the movie, I think in the book, it seems as though the rounds just hit, and there's no bracketing, there's no adjusting. They're just dead on accurate.
Exactly, and that's what we found in our investigation, that they already had the coordinates locked in. But also the time it took to fire 6 rounds, like there was no fire, adjust fire, fire for effect. It was fire for effect, and then within a matter of seconds, there were 6 rounds on target.
And like he pointed out, the 2 tubes. So the 1 tube hit the annex building, the skiff building 3 times. The other tube hit the compound, but it was kind of like on the wall outside of the annex, if that makes sense. So there wasn't like a readjustment between the wall. It was just a different tube shooting, and they all shot in the exact same spot.
And all rounds detonated?
As far as I understand, yes.
Okay. Wow. That's not my experience with, some of those guys. They forget to pull the pin. They don't know where the hell they're doing. So in this case, they were.
Remember, these guys just fought a revolution. These are the best mortarmen in the world in 2012, and people lose sight of that. I mean, our terrorists that attacked us. Remember, this isn't their first war even. They fought in the Afghanistan Mujahideen. They fought in Iraq. They fought in the Algeria Civil War. They fought in the Libyan Revolution. And a lot of them went and fought in Syria. So these are very well-trained terrorists that night coming up against us.
And Yako says should be 81 millimeter mortar, but
I believe it is 81 millimeter.
Okay, so they had armor. I just assumed it was some Soviet piece of crap 82 millimeter mortar. So we're thinking it was an American mortar system?
So without getting into too much detail, you have to understand that, again, we assisted them with the revolution.
Thank you, Boon. Thank you for putting that context in there. Dr. Fuller.
No, it's just fascinating to hear this sort of on the ground detail, because all of my experience around this has been through the videos and sitting in the committee hearing. So I'm really, really grateful that you folks took the time to sit down and talk to us this morning. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Well, let me ask you this, 12 years after Benghazi, are we any safer today, guys?
Not at all. No, we're actually much worse than we were 12 years ago. Something that we didn't understand at the time, and when I say we, the agency, one of our failures were we weren't really collecting for counterterrorism in Libya at that time. We were told that Al-Qaeda was on the run. They weren't. In fact, they were thriving and growing underneath our noses in Libya. To this day, that continues to happen. To this day, the United States government still supports the terrorists in Libya, and they do not support General Haftar, who runs the LNA, which is the only legitimate opposition to the terrorists. I'll let Sarah get into it, but our investigation has spilled over from Libya to Afghanistan and some of the other usual hotspots. But in fact, our attack was an Al-Qaeda attack. Al-Qaeda is growing, and it's still a threat. It's more of a threat now than it was even before 9/11.
Yeah, and like Boon said, so if you want to just compare Libya, and then you want to Libya in like 2012 and then Afghanistan in like 2021, right? So Al-Qaeda set up terrorist camps in Libya, but only like 5, okay? And they didn't even go the next level and do like the jihadi madrasas we're seeing in Afghanistan. Now, with those 5 terrorist camps, within a couple years, ISIS moves in, Al-Qaeda and ISIS join forces. They kill over 20,000 Libyan civilians. They kill 8,000 members of the Libyan National Army. This is just in like a small 2-year window, okay? Now, when we go to Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda has now established 30 training camps. 7 of them are suicide bomber only. So we're talking about a problem 5 to 30, right? The resurgence in Afghanistan is so off the charts of what we saw in Libya. It is the most dangerous thing occurring right now. And the crazy part is no one's talking about it. We're only hearing about ISIS, which ISIS right now in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, is about 7,000 fighters. Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan has already sent 10,000 fighters just to Syria and Iraq. They're going to hit 100,000 trained new fighters this year because they've been training since 2021. And our government is ignoring it and not talking about it. And as you can imagine, we're letting a lot of Afghans into this country that haven't been properly vetted. And Afghans will say the same things like, you let a terrorist in, you let another terrorist in. And it's just being completely ignored and covered up. And it's going to be a huge problem.
Yeah, I was training a 3-letter agency recently up in New Jersey, and they're like, yeah, there's a 9,000 of them Afghanis. This is relatively not long after the fall, sitting on this camp, and they're just kind of wandering away. You'll see them walking into town, and I'm like, what in God's name are we doing here? Well, thank God we got a secure southern border, though, right, Sarah?
Yeah, that's a whole nother issue. And actually, what a lot of people don't understand is, so when the Benghazi attacks happened, our terrorists actually fled. They thought, oh no, the might of the U.S. military is going to come and they're going to start bombing Benghazi. So prior to our attacks, they got passports in advance to leave Benghazi. So now they're in Afghanistan, they're doing the exact same thing. The government of the Taliban is making passports. So they're not just making passports. So for our attackers, for example, we had a German-Turkish attacker. He left Libya on a Libyan passport. He wasn't Libyan. So the same thing now is happening in Afghanistan. The Taliban is making passports for ISIS, for Al-Qaeda, for the tricky Taliban Pakistan, for IMU, which is like a Uzbekistan terrorist group. They're making them for ETIM, which is at Turkmenistan. They're also making the passports for Chinese spies who are interested in coming to the United States, Iranian spies, Pakistani spies. So there is no secure Afghan passport that exists anymore. So anyone who tells you we vetted that person with an Afghan passport, it doesn't have their correct name on it, it doesn't have their birthday, they don't have the father's name, and most of them might not even have the correct nationality because it could be a Pakistani with an Afghan passport. So the US government is like completely lying about how insecure these passports are, even if they do come to the border and be presented, and then we say we vetted them in some way.
Another terrifying issue with our attackers in particular is none of them are watch listed, so they don't even need to sneak over the U.S. border. They can get on a Qatar flight and fly over here legally. We wouldn't even know.
Yeah, even one of our attackers in 2018, State Department did issue him in a visa. Luckily, he was on an internal watch list in Turkey, and the Turkish government stopped him from getting on the plane to America.
Dr. Fuller?
I'm just laughing because the day we're relying upon the Turkish government for our security is a sad day indeed.
Yep, that's how bad it is on Benghazi.
It sounds like this is not just it's a terrorist network that runs a travel agency to aid and abet other terrorists getting access into the country. Now, I want to ask you this. When Director Wray comes out and says, guys, I've got more flashing red lights than ever before, is that hyperbole, or do you guys concur with that?
Well, we concur, but he's waited too long to do it. For 2.5 years, they've let these terrorists fester in Afghanistan. They knew this was going to be the result of the way we left. So now he's basically doing CYA because something's going to happen. When you talk about terrorist travel, though, one thing you need to realize is Al-Qaeda runs a huge chunk. Like I'd say like 20% of all the Hajj travel in the world. So Al-Qaeda runs travel agencies across the world. They have people sitting at consular desks in U.S. embassies. For 20 years, Al-Qaeda wasn't just shooting guns. They were building a giant almost business enterprise, and they do run a lot of the travel agencies in the world. And that's why it's so easy for them to move terrorists and to get fake documents, to get visas, etc., because they have taken the time to make these relationships, and the people they put in junior, they have ambassadors. We have one of our Libyan terrorists is an ambassador in Malaysia, and he's been doing it for a decade, issuing passports to terrorists. So people need to know that Al-Qaeda's guys have moved up, and now they're in these senior roles in helping with this terrorist travel.
Will Parker is a retired naval officer. He's got a couple of questions. He says, lack of human is devastating. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Afghanistan right now is the greatest example, but like Boon said, so how the US government works is there's these national intelligence priorities, right? And the policymakers choose those. They get pushed down to the intelligence community, and then we go collect. So in Libya in 2012, they weren't asking for terrorism reporting. They were asking, how is the Libyan government being formed? What's happening with the Libyan oil? So we had only one counterterrorism case officer in all of Libya in 2012. People need to understand that. One collector, all the rest were political case officers collecting political information.
We try to be non-political. Unfortunately, you can't do that when it comes to terrorism in the Benghazi incident. The American people would like to think that the three-letter agencies, FBI, CIA, they do what's right when it comes to security for America. That's not the case. They are driven by policy. Policy is driven by political parties. That's just the sad reality of it. So there's a lot of things that we should be collecting on and should be doing, but we don't because it's not a priority.
To the policymakers, it might be a priority to an American, but not to the people you voted into office and you let stay there.
Right. Guys, we're bumping up on our time here today, but I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation, and I really would love an opportunity to continue with the round 2 if you guys are up for that.
Yeah, we'd love to.
Fantastic. Dr. Fuller, any closing questions for Sarah or Boon?
No, but thank you again for coming on the show. Really appreciate your insight and the work you're doing, and keep it up. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for yours as well.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And it's great to have your insights.
Yeah. God bless you guys, Sarah and Boon, for what you're doing, telling truth to power. I can't wait to get my hands on your book. And guys and gals out there in Warrior Nation, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please check out their book. Sarah, can you give them the name of your book and where they can go to find it, please?
Yeah, Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy. You can get it on places like Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If you actually want a signed copy from Boon and I, we sell it on our website. It's just Askari Media Group. It's ASKARI mediagroup.com. And Askari Media Group's also our handle on Instagram. And that's where we release when we find new terrorists involved in our attacks. And then we spend most of the rest of the time making fun of terrorists. So if you have a good sense of humor, follow our page. If you don't, you might want to stay away from it.
All right, guys, I can't thank you enough for being on today. Boon, Semper Fi, brother. It's a great finally get to sit down and chat with you. Dr. Fuller, thank you for being on today. And Dr. Fuller, I want you for round 2 as well, please.
I'm always available, Rich. Love interacting with you and your audience.
Well, Dr. Fuller, you want to take us out?
Fight's coming, folks. Be ready.